Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud While Stoned. In this video, we're going to start a new Little Blue book, and it is Little Blue book number 1122, and it is titled The Degradation of Women by Joseph McCabe. And as you see, this is my original copy that goes in my collection. It's in a Mylar bag to protect it, because this is the copy I'm reading from. As you can see, the cover is already gone. And then here is said cover for the book, for the copy I'm reading from. These things are very fragile and they tend to fall apart when I read them. So, anyhow, this is The Degradation of Women. Of Woman. The Degradation of Woman. Written by Joseph McCabe. And it doesn't have a copyright date. But, no, it does, but you can't read it. Generally, these were written in the 1920s. Table of contents for this little blue book are Chapter 1, The Claim of the Churches. Chapter 2, Woman Before Christ. Chapter 3, The Greek and the Roman Woman. Chapter 4, The Effect of Christianity. Chapter 5, The Middle Ages and Woman. Chapter 6, and final chapter, The Clergy and the Modern Struggle. And when it says modern struggle, it means 1920s. Alright. Pardon me. Let's get into it. Shall we? Alrighty, here we go. The Degradation of Woman, Chapter 1, The Claim of the Churches. An editorial from one of New York's greatest dailies reaches me just as I begin this book. It informs us that religion is so widely held, so sturdily and vitally cherished in the United States, that there is a prospect of the country opening up a new religious epoch. It seems that religion is still one of the primary creative forces of the United States. We learn that we are far from the deists of the Revolutionary era, and from the naive irreverences of Robert Ingersoll. I wish at least we were far from the days when journalists and statesmen talked deliberate bunk, about religion. The deistic attitude toward Christianity was shared by only a few thousand highly educated people in the Revolutionary era. But 1/2 the population of America is now alienated from Christianity. The writer knows that. He himself remarks that in 1924 the organized churches had a membership of 46,142,210. Are there any unorganized churches in America? In any case, this figure represents little more than 1/3 of the population. As to church activities, men threatened with bankruptcy are usually very active. To say, never has the church stood higher in the respect of American people or been a more potent contributor to national progress is a lie. The life of every city in America, 4/5 of the books published in America, half the sermons preached in America, and half the plays presented tell the opposite. It is respectable to say these smooth insincerities in the press of British and America is disreputable, a mark of bad taste or inferior sentiment. To tell the truth about religion, the sole fount of truthfulness, is fenced by more untruths than any other belief or institution in the life of man. To lie in sport is ungentlemanly. To lie in business is mean. To lie in politics is futile. Well, I have no idea what politics are like today. But to lie in religion is a service to the nation. That is the pretext of all this insincerity. The genuine motive of it is different and need not be discussed. The pretext is that Christianity has created the civilization of the world and is necessary to the maintenance of that civilization. A little pragmatism goes a long way in such matters. What is truth? Is it an ethereal, unpractical question? Oh, I'm sorry. I read that wrong. It is an ethereal and unpractical question. The maintenance of the idealism created for us, of our lofty standards, of the integrity and fearlessness of the press, of the uncompromising truthfulness of our pulpit, of, oh, you know the phrases. And I take this as my text because in this little blue book, I begin the consideration of the utility of religion. I'm going to show that we ought to say futility. I have dealt with the question of its truth. We have studied the origin and evolution of the religion. We have examined the civilizations which preceded the influence of Christianity. We have seen the real origin of Christianity and the real reasons why it became the religion of Europe and of most of the world. See Little Blue Books, number 1007, which I have up here on my collection, number 1008, which will be upcoming, and number 1030. It is not an edifying story, but it is a comparatively mild and inodorous story when contrasted with that which I am now going to tell. What Christianity did for the world. To begin with, I am taking 4 definite issues of paramount importance. We ask what Christianity did for women, for the worker, for the child, and for moral or social life. 4 little blue books are given the reply, in facts and figures, not in rhetoric. No one will suggest that these 4 issues are chosen because the reply is easy. It is easy. There will be no need to strain evidence to use disputed historical statements. The recognized facts of the world's evolution since the 5th century allow only one answer. Yet it is precisely in these fields that the supposed service of Christianity is sought. H.G. Wells, at least, knew what was claimed when, in his famous World History, he said that Christianity freed the slave and gave the world schools. Christians really believe that. For the other issues, you have only to consider the weekly prognostications of the dire fate in prospect for women and for morals and refinement if Christianity perishes. All over the Christian world, elderly spinsters are implored to make their checks larger on the grounds of the horrors that threaten them when the clergy are no longer here to protect their virtue. All over the world, it is claimed that the new religion lifted woman to a higher position. The circumstances of our time have given a special interest to this issue, and they have at the same time made the Christian claim seem to every thoughtful man and woman more ironic than ever. Pardon me. I am what is called a feminist. 30 years ago I left a monastery and began a sane human existence. Within 2 or 3 years, I find I was defending the rights of woman. 25 years ago I sat in the lobby of the British Parliament with 2 of the oldest woman fighters awaiting the issue of a suffrage bill. The cause was not then respectable, and I was the only writer who associated with them. Now it is the blessing of the church, and my services are not required or mentioned. It is successful. Only a few weeks ago I attended a great women's meeting in the Central Park of London. There were 100 orators, and half of them introduced Jesus and the Bible. Church banners glittered on the platforms. Pretty parsons evoked ripples of laughter and tears of sentiment. And I hung unknown on the fringes of the great crowds and smiled, rather cynically. Some of us can remember the 40 years fight, or 40 years of the fight for the elementary rights of women. Why had the fight to be undertaken at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century? Had the age of Voltaire brought some worsening of the position of woman? Were these injustices, which we fought a creation of our materialistic age? What is the simple meaning of the fact that during 1850, years of the era of redemption, there was no struggle, and that the struggle began and was carried to a successful conclusion in the era of skepticism? At least there is no dispute about the fact, and nobody above the age of 20 is ignorant of it. Maybe Dad. Yet the clergy and religious writers are able, on Butte, to tell women all over the world that Christianity had been the best friend they ever had. The suffrage? That is a political matter, they say, a detail in a necessarily slow political evolution. Very few men had the suffrage in Europe a century ago. None had it a few centuries earlier. It does not occur to them or to the women to wonder why no one had the suffrage. The political sentiment of the time was for despotic monarchy. Religion was not consulted, and so on. The clergy are poor sociologists. You have to remind them that it is not merely a question of the suffrage. Let them put the position in the words of one of the most respected of American women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She is describing the wrongs of women in what was then, in 1850, the most enlightened city of the United States, Boston. This is what she wrote. Woman could not hold any property, either earned or inherited. If unmarried, she was obliged to place it in the hands of a trustee to whose will she was subject. If she contemplated marriage and desired to call her property her own, she was forced by law to make a contract with her intended husband by which she gave up all title or claim to it. A woman, either married or unmarried, could hold no office of trust or power. She was not a person. She was not recognized as a citizen. She was not a factor in the human family. She was not a unit, but a zero in the sum of civilization. The status of a married woman was little better than that of a domestic servant. By the English common law, in force in Boston in 1850, her husband was her lord and master. He had the sole custody of her person and of her minor children. He could punish her with a stick no bigger than his thumb, and she could not complain against him. The common law of that state held man and wife to be one person, but that one person was the husband. He could by will deprive her of every part of her property, and also of what had been hers before marriage. He was the owner of all her real estate and her earnings. The wife could make no contract and no will, nor, without her husband's consent, dispose of the legal interest of her real estate. She did not own a rag of her clothing. She had no personal rights and could hardly call her own soul hers. Her husband could steal her children, rob her of her clothing, neglect to support the family. She had no legal redress. If a wife earned money by her labor, the husband could claim the pay as his share of the proceedings. And that is from the History of Woman's Suffrage, Volume 3, page 290. Boston, 1850. The comfortable matron, who now listens to mellifluous assurances from the Episcopal or Methodist pulpit, not to know these things. Let her imagine herself in this position of her grandmother. "What a degradation!" she would exclaim. "Well, madam, I'm going to show you that the degradation was brought upon woman by Christianity. You're going to see, if you will condescend to read an infidel book, that Christianity found woman free and respected, and degraded her to the position described by Miss Cathy Stanton, and that the degradation was lifted from her mainly owing to the work of infidels in this age, which seems to you so materialistic and menacing to women. What then is the Christian claim? On what sort of evidence is it based? Bless you, rhetorical claims are not, as a rule, based upon evidence. Evidence is cold facts, are rather boring, sometimes actually disagreeable. What we love is sonorous phraseology, delivered with eupeptic dogmatism or original bluntness, or softened with a tender glow of sentiment, which it has taken many hours to make natural and spontaneous. What we love is the vague insinuation of horrors in the pagan past or the pagan future, which religious delicacy forbids us to make more explicit. A sermon is not a mere lecture. We go to church not to learn, but to be uplifted. Some years ago, I was invited to write a book on the question of the precise contribution of the Christian religion to the civilization of the world. Queen Victoria, not a learned person, though not as stupid as the most members of the British royal family, had said that the Bible was the source of England's greatness, and this authoritative assurance still reverberates from the pulpits. Since I do not care to waste either my own time or that of my readers, I ask a friend to ask a relative, who is a learned divine, what the church really claimed to have done. But my friend incautiously said that the information was for me, and the answer was very guarded. They do not, it seems, claim to have created civilization. There are specific contributions. There is the general sentiment of charity and justice. There is the refinement of morals. In short, I was referred to certain standard Christian works, and I read them. Dr. Fairbairn, in particular, was recommended, and I learned from him that early Christianity put a halo about woman, taught us reverence for woman. We shall see. Others contended that the pagan had regarded woman merely as an instrument of his lust, and Christianity changed all that. We shall see. Others felt sure that the apotheosis of Mary must have uplifted the whole sex. We shall see. Others, a little behind in times, ventured to quote the heroic virtues of Agnes, Catherine, Cecilia, and all the other dead myths. In short, no religious writer, in talking of the change or improvement which Christianity is claimed to have effected, accurately sets out the position of woman before 400 AD, when the world was driven into the church. And the position of woman, say, in 800 AD, I doubt if there is a religious writer capable of doing it. However that may be, their followers never pressed them to do it. What a mass of laborious research I should have been spared in the last 30 years had I remained a priest. But I have never been able to overcome a kind of prejudice of mine, that statements of fact ought to be based upon fact. Boy, he'd hate today. So you know what to expect here. 2 chapters will give you the facts about woman's position before the 4th century of the Christian era. Then 2 chapters will show, in the prosy language of history, what her position was after the 4th century. It is an original method, no doubt, but there are points in its favor. One is that you can draw your own conclusions. And we'll pause there because that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2. Woman before Christ. In this chapter, we will consider the position of woman before Christ was born. The Greek and the Roman woman we will take in the next chapter as contemporaries of Christ. And, of course, there we must proceed with caution. A preacher first abuses the pagan Romans, then, when you prove their greatness, he points out that Jesus was already in the world, and in some subtle way, by some imperceptible means. But not even the most ingenious apologist will attempt to prove that the position of woman in ancient Egypt, Babylon, or Crete was lit by the light and uplifted by the spiritual force of a gospel which did not yet exist. Were these nations not notoriously in darkness and the shadow of death? But, says the preacher, politely, do not forget that there was already a foregleam of Christianity in the world. A partial revelation had been communicated to the Hebrews, and the Hebrews were brought into contact with the Babylonians and may, by their superior ideals, have moderated the grossness of pagan conduct. People really do say these things in churches. In the year 586 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon destroyed Jerusalem and carried away most of the Jews of the better class to his great city on the Euphrates. Let us imagine the dark-eyed maid Rebecca, or the portly matron Susanna, blinking in the light of the brilliant metropolis and then inquiring what the position of woman was. We know well what the position of woman was in Judea. It is pithily put in Leviticus 12, verses 1 through 5. This book had in the year 586 not yet been forged. It is true, but it clearly gives an old law. And here it is. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a woman have conceived seed, and born a man child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. According to the days of the separation from her infirmity shall she be unclean. And on the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised, and she shall then continue in the blood of her purifying 33 days. She shall touch no hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary, until the days of her purifying be fulfilled. But if she bear a maid child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her separation, and she shall continue in the blood of her purifying 66 days. Pretty ironic to describe this bit of primitive tribal barbarism and superstition as a special revelation from the Most High. It just expresses woman's position under this foregleam of Christianity. The female was an inferior creature. She never had a lover or chose a husband. Her parents handed her over to a youth who became her very despotic lord and master. She was unclean about 10 times in 20 years as a rule, to say nothing of shorter periods. She had no property, no personality. Her husband could divorce her when he willed. She could not divorce him when she willed. Her husband could take a second wife or a concubine, or dally with painted ladies. Rebecca had to disguise herself as a prostitute if she wanted a change. And when she had fulfilled the whole law, she was peppered with spiteful aphorisms about her malice and odiousness. Rebecca would not find this inspired code in Babylon. She would see the women living under the code of King Hammurabi, which the old monarch refuses to ascribe to any god. And, as laws are very solid documents, let us quote at once a few clauses about woman's position to contrast with the Jewish law. Apparently the numbered Law 127. If a man has pointed the finger against a priestess or the wife of another man unjustifiably, that man shall be thrown before the judge, and his brow shall be branded. 134. If a man has been taken prisoner, and there is no food in his house, and his wife enters the house of another, then that woman bears no blame. Law 137. If a man has set his face to divorce a concubine who has borne him children, or a wife who has presented him with children, then he shall give back to that woman her dowry, and he shall give her the usufruct of field, garden, and property, and she shall bring up her children. Rule 138. If a man divorce his spouse, who has not borne him children, he shall give to her all the silver of the bride price, and restore to her her dowry, which she brought from the house of her father. Rule 139. If there was no bride price, he shall give her 1 mina of silver for the divorce. Rule 142. If a woman hate her husband and says, "Thou shalt not possess me," the reason for her dislike shall be inquired into. If she is careful and has no fault, but her husband takes himself away and neglects her, then that woman is not to blame. She shall take her dowry and go back to her father's house. Rule 171b. The spouse shall take her dowry and the settlement which her husband made her and wrote in a tablet for her, and she shall dwell in the domicile of her husband. While she lives, she shall enjoy it. She may not sell it for silver, but after her it is her children's. Not bad for the year 2100 BC, is it? In fact, immeasurably superior to the Christian law under which Christian women were living in England and New England 4,000 years afterward, and far better than the Jewish law of 500 BC. Yet this is the oldest law of Babylon. Rebecca would, in short, find women as free and respected in Babylon in 586 BC as they are in Boston today. I show in another book, Morals in Ancient Babylon, little blue book number 1076, how the deciphering of the literature of ancient Babylon has completely discredited these picturesque ideas of the vice of the great city, which are still used to give purple patches to sermons. So far, were the Babylonian from enjoying a remarkable looseness in sexual relations that they incurred sentence of death by adultery. We will hope that their practice was not as savage as their law, and there was not one law for the man and one for the woman, as in Christendom. The man and the woman were bound together and thrown into the Euphrates. A man was burned alive for rape. A mother and son were burned alive for incest. A man was drowned for intercourse with his daughter-in-law. A retired priestess was burned alive if she went to a wine shop for a drink. That's a bit drastic. A woman was forced to prostitute herself. No woman was forced to prostitute herself at the temple, and there was probably no temple of that kind in Babylon. The marriage contracts, of which we have a large number, commonly guarantee that the bride is a virgin. In other words, if we were to return tomorrow to the morals of ancient Babylon, as preachers somberly announce that we may, if their income is cut off, a woman would find herself protected from man's lust by a series of drastic laws, which no section of Christendom ever knew. Such is the imbecility of these dismal prophecies about the future of the race. When at last the truth, which has been known to scholars for decades, breaks through the dense mists of the religious world, we shall have the Christian matrons of America demanding to return to pagan morals and the wicked people of America, secretly supported by the clergy, violently resist the proposal. Pardon me. Let's take a drink. Woman was at any rate quite free in ancient Babylonia. Her rights were splendidly protected by law. She held property as legally as man did. She was not an inferior creature. She had no periods of uncleanness. She did not miss the Christian Mary because Ishtar was one of the greatest deities of Babylonia, and Assyria, and at least in later Babylon, was an ethical deity. Woman had, of course, no vote, as there were no votes for either sex. In a word, she was in every respect the equal of man, free to own and control her own property, and therefore be independent, able to divorce an unworthy or even merely neglectful husband at any time, protected against any encroachments upon her rights by other women. That is what Rebecca, coming from the female slavery of Judea, would find in benighted Babylon. And that is where we're going to stop for video number 1 of Little Blue Book number 1142, titled The Degradation of Women, written by Joseph McCabe. Thanks for listening, and join me in part 2.